Okay. Hmm. Well, this is still acting very strangely. Okay. Are we back? I think we're back. I can see myself doing things on some screens. The question is, can y'all hear me? I can see myself doing things on some screens. The question is, can y'all hear me? Okay, Jared says bring up the volume. Okay. All right, Mia and Jill, say something and see what happens. Uh oh, now I can't hear you guys. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. I think I can hear you now.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm not getting feedback. Druid, are we doing
Hooray!
feedback? Okay, I'm not getting feedback. Things seems to be okay on my end.
I Things sound fine on my end.
Okay, I think we may have fixed it, you guys. Oh.
What did you do?
it's
Miracle,
called
miracle.
it's called restarting things.
Um,
You know
Hello,
how when you
IT. Have you tried turning it off and on again?
uh-huh. Yes. So I did yes, I did my own help desk. I said, "Do I have it plugged in?" Yes. Is it turned on? Uh-huh. Restart. Okay. Back to
all
it.
right, well then I will play this. Just do me a favor and just Steph, I can see you on my phone. Just give me a thumbs up or down if the volume needs to come up or down, okay?
Okay. And I am watching the chat, so I think we're all good.
Okay.
Whole of all things quilty for over 12 years. A member of the American Quilt Study Group, avid collector and student of antique quilts and textiles, Mia is passionate about helping folks find the story within their own quilts and to keep the hobby of quilting alive. She resides in St. Paul, Minnesota, is the moderator of Treadle On, a people-powered sewing machine group, and presents on quilt history, feed sacks, hand quilting, antique sewing machines, and more to quilt guilds, quilt shows, and living history organizations around the country. You can follow Mia at History by Hand on Facebook.
I want to pause right here because Mia, do me a favor real quick and just tell everybody about something you tend to like to do on Fridays on social media.
So on Fridays, I tend to do this thing called Fabulous Fabrics Friday. So I randomly pick a textile out of my collection. So I photograph every textile in my and every quilt piece in my quilt collection, and I'll randomly pick one and talk about it to help educate people on textiles, to just talk about how cool a textile is or a quilt that I have, or just highlight some really cool stuff that maybe folks didn't know about before. So Fabulous Fabrics Friday is on my Patches of Time website, which is facebook.com/history by hand. And you can follow us there and see really cool stuff.
So for people that we were talking to at the museum this past Sunday that were like, I want to learn more about just fabrics and textile, kind of some fabric history and what's looking at, Mia's a great source for doing that. And you don't even have to like, she just brings all of the knowledge to you and you soak it up like a plant. It's really fun. I know you haven't done a whole lot of them lately, right? There haven't been a
I
whole lot lately,
Yeah, I've been a little busy, but I'm picking it back up this Friday. So
but
tomorrow
you
you
can
will see
definitely
one.
look back at all the old ones. There's lots of great stuff.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, let's go
Well,
here.
and if I may add,
Hello,
sorry, I was
everyone.
if
Go
I
ahead.
may add, I learned a bunch from Mia because I got a chance to hang out with her at the AQSG booth at QuiltCon, and I mean, just to add wealth of knowledge, I kind of stood back and was like, I'm real bad at this. Mia's really good at this. Like, It was pretty fun. So,
You are not bad at it.
Aw, you are so good at it. But thank you. I'm so honored to hear that. Thank you so much.
alrighty. So let's get into
Okay.
your video.
And today we're going to be talking about finding the story within. As stated earlier, I am Mia Clift, and you can find me at History by Hand on Facebook or at info@patchesoftime.com. We all love a good story, whether it's, reading a bedtime story to our kids or our nephews. Even in this picture, you can be like, why is that inflatable bed there in the background? Fun fact, it was for that little truck that's down in the corner, but still, we all love a good story. It's what draws us into television, to movies, to podcasts, to the work we do, to the people that we engage with. And even in quilts, we can find those stories. Anything in material culture has a story. So from the moment we're born, we engage in an ongoing and increasingly intensive interaction with the environments that are to varying degrees natural and human-made. They're an environment that we have shaped and in turn have shaped us. And yet, in many ways, we've barely begun to study its role in our lives. So, this author of Material Cultures, Material Minds, she actually wrote this in her book, and it's true. Everything around us shapes who we are. It shapes our lives. It tells us stories. It absorbs our stories. And that's what we're looking for today. And that's what we're talking about today, is that quilts, they even have a story, and it does help shape our environment just as much as anything natural. Here we can see one that in the Every Quilt Has a Story 2 slide, really unique quilt. And, the question is, how did this get made? Where are we coming from? Where did it get made? All of these stories that are within these quilts that we can discover if we just take a look. So, for example, the quilt on the left was made the quilt on the right, I'm sorry. The quilt on the right was made 51 years ago for the wedding of these two people on the left. That's my parents. My Aunt Becky made it for them, and it sat for years. I can remember it being in the house, but I couldn't use it. It was kept because it was a historical item for my family. But it just kind of sat in the basement for a really long time. And it wasn't until Aunt Becky would later teach me to quilt years and years later that I learned to appreciate it. And then it even got shown at Houston. So we even continued the story even after it was made and after it was gifted. And the story continues today in how Aunt Becky still quilts and how I still quilt. So how do we find these stories? And I think you've seen in just looking at a couple of slides here, we might find the stories through, we know when it was made or how it was made or when it was given to us and who it was made by. We can look at different aspects of the quilt. We can even tell based off of its construction techniques, its fabrics, and more. This quilt on the right, again, is another one that says Youth Group 74 in the center. This was made at Harmony Church of the Brethren in Myersville, Maryland in 1974 by their youth group and given to my grandmother, who was part of the education team for that youth group, and she had just had a stroke. So that was a gift to her. But all of the people on this quilt are people that I know in my community, and about half of them I'm related to. So that story continues on through me because I knew these people and I knew the quilt and why it was made. One of the first things that we can do and we can look at when we talk about quilting is the quilt patterns that are used to make the quilt. This is some of the biggest pieces of ephemera and great ways to track down the origins of a quilt or where they got the idea for the quilt. And you can see sometimes it's as simple as pulling a newspaper clipping from the Kansas City Star or a mail order pattern from any number of different companies that made mail order catalogs, or even today.
I want to stop here. Mia, if you could touch for a second on your ephemera collection for people that don't know.
Oh, yes. So in addition to collecting sewing machines and quilts, I have an extensive ephemera collection. And so ephemera means anything paper. or really anything that can be discarded. So a lot of Kansas City Star patterns, Laura Wheeler patterns. In the pictures here, we have a drawing that was taken from the Kansas City Star, and then somebody colored it in. We've got a scrapbook full of the mail order patterns that this person, I suppose, wanted to make or wanted to order, or maybe she even did order. They just didn't get stuck in this book, along with actual cardboard templates to draw quilt patterns together to make the actual quilt. So I have probably about 10 notebooks or 10 1.5 inch binders full of ephemera. And in addition to that, I have a bunch of templates, a bunch of quilting templates, vinyl templates, a whole bunch of the Mountain Mist patterns. So Mountain Mist would take their batting and wrap it in a paper, and in the paper was a pattern along with quilting instructions. And then I also have 2 swatch books, one from 1850 and one from, it was a combination of books from about 1840 to about 1900. So that all is ephemera as well.
And then what are your goals with all this ephemera? What do you plan to do with it?
That's a really good question. I personally like to make the patterns out of it, but I also like to look at things that we may not think about, like why was this pattern popular, or why are we missing patterns in this period, or even for the textile stuff for the swatch books, it's understanding what was available in that time from different makers in different regions. So the 1850 swatch book looks like stuff that we wouldn't get here in the United States because it was printed in France in the 1850s. We didn't get the same kind of prints until about the until post-Civil War, 1865, 1870. So it's really interesting to see how long it took for that stuff to come over, to be able to see where patterns got their popularity, how people use these different patterns. There's so many different rabbit holes you could go down. Again, finding more stories.
Yeah, I love how this ephemera really helps you date things. I mean, that's been kind of my saving grace in a lot of cases, is being able to find, the newspaper or the magazine, or, like these notebooks. I have one that's much smaller than your wonderful ones, but knowing I have a date that's in the notebook, and I can see where I think it's from Ladies Art, where she's pasted in these pictures, and so you have like this moment in time, and it's fun. If you don't have the full story, it's fun to make up a story to go along with it.
Oh, it's fun to just get lost and suppose. Like
Mhm.
this one with the pink and the blue in the left-hand corner. It's like, did she ever make that quilt? And why did she choose to make the one yellow and green and the rest are blue and pink? You
Mhm.
know, was she trying to make a statement? Was she trying to do something different? Or was that just the colored pencils she had at the time she was drawing it?
Maybe auditioning colors.
Yeah,
Ready to continue?
Yes.
sure.
You can order them from Connecting Threads or even Missouri Star. While it's moved from mail order to internet ordering, it still comes in the mail. Pre-cut pieces like you see down in the picture. People draw their own patterns so that they can color them in and figure out how they want to lay them out. Or even in art, we see a lot of art quilts happening where people are taking inspiration from things like Van Gogh's Starry Night to photography, pictures that they've taken on their own, and applied quilting techniques and methodology to them. So we can really look at the pattern and kind of see where the producer was coming from, why they chose to do these things, where they got the inspiration, and where they went with it afterwards. It's really kind of fun. So here's a pattern story for you. So I picked up the quilt on the left in Minnesota at an antique sale, and it was a really unique pattern. It took me a little while to figure out what the actual pattern was, and it wasn't until I had worked with posting to a group on Facebook with people from the American Quilt Study Group that someone came back and said it was made by Hubert Vermeeren. The pattern was made by Hubert Vermeeren, and it was called the Windmill Star Quilt. And I was given this clipping. Hubert Vermeeren was a designer out of Iowa who was a mathematician, and he created very complicated patterns. To wit, it's very rare to see one of his patterns completed because of the complexity. And you can see that complexity in this piece where you have the center windmill square, but then the corner pieces end up turning into 8-pointed stars, or Lemoyne stars as we call them, in the corners of the blocks to create a secondary pattern within that quilt. that's a more complicated piece than we typically see, especially out of a cut and play kind of pattern. And so it's really unique to see the piece. It's unique to see how it's assembled and put together. And it just ends up having this cool connection to this very unique pattern designer and someone who actually tried one of his pieces and made a success. Textiles are a great way to tell a story about a quilt. Um, between our romanticism of different fabrics and different prints and different colors to understanding that every single textile has a story behind it, how it was made, how it developed, the popularity of it, even eras and the popularity and why they became popular at different points as well. So here we have three very differing and striking pieces of textile in front of you. You have a stack of feed sacks on the left, and we have this romanticism with feed sacks and how uh, generations were making quilts and clothing and other things out of them. This centerpiece is all fabrics from the turn of the 18th century into the 19th century. It's from a quilt that's dated 1816. And you can see the uniqueness of the colorings, the uniqueness of the placement, even down in the corner where the fabric is actually being eaten away by the mordants that were made in the, or that were used in the dyes to make these prints. And then on the right, we even have these pre-cut kits, these pre-cut blocks that you could mail order, going back to the mail order patterns. And that way you didn't have to cut these pieces. You didn't have to have the variety of fabric. You could just order these little packets. And then you'd have your pre-cut kit to make your quilt and be able to work on it accordingly.
Can we pause for a second there, Jill?
We can also tell a time period.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was going to say about textiles, I am constantly working on doing a better job at dating fabrics, and I know Mia has done the AQS appraiser course, so I know that you've spent a lot of time learning. But I think that there's some really incredible stories that could be gleaned from quilts. And I'm thinking of the one that I think it was our friend Dave had, and I can't remember. I think it was just a top. I don't think it was a fully done quilt, but he had brought it to the AQSG booth at QuiltCon, and I remembered us talking about there's fabrics from the 80s in there, but there's also fabrics from the 1880s in there, and so it was clearly either somebody's amazing scrap bag or it was blocks that had been worked on and put together over a period of time, and you can guess that it's possibly a family. Or, it also could have been one of those things somebody picked up some awesome blocks and continued making the quilt. But, you like to think maybe there was some, a family continuum in there. And I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, that was a great quilt where you just saw 100 years of fabric in it. And it could have been that that person had the original blocks from the early the 1880s and then just kept piling on to it, or it could have just been somebody had a stack of them in their sewing room and then they passed on and somebody wanted to finish it off. But it was so fun to be able to look and say, okay, that's that fabric, that's from that period, this is this period, and just be like, there's a whole story going on in that one piece. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And as we turn this one back on, is that the Centennial Green in that third picture?
It is the Centennial Green in that picture. It absolutely is Centennial Green.
That is one color I have gotten very good at picking out. It's like Crest toothpaste.
And how did you find a picture here of my boyfriend?
You're related. You're dating Horace Greeley.
Yeah, I love his gray hairdo.
I mean, it's a choice.
All right, are we ready?
Yes, let's go.
Yeah.
And we can also tell some interesting stories. So this is a fun textile tale. So the quilt on the right is a quilt in my collection. Each one of the little diamonds to make these stars is about 2 inches long, maybe a little less. But as I take a piece, I tend to hang it up, as you can see in the picture, and I photograph as many of the fabrics as I can. Well, getting into it, I found these unique fabrics, the one with a coat on it, and then the one with the little the wording there in the center. both of those are pieces of the same fabric that were cut into tiny, tiny pieces. And it turns out they were for the man in the picture, Horace Greeley, during his 1872 presidential campaign. Now, one, how cool is it that somebody was printing fabric for a presidential campaign in 1872? Two, interesting that it was for Horace Greeley, because he ended up losing to Grant. But also, it was his byline. It says, "What I know about," is the wording on the strip, and then his little coat, which he's wearing in the picture, which is kind of cool.
Little tidbit here. In our live chat, Kathy just said, long story. I have been in Horace Greeley's tomb.
Well, Kathy, that's awesome, and I want to hear more about that the next
Yeah,
time I see you.
that seems like a great textile tale to add.
Yeah, right? Like
Add that
of
to
all
the story.
of all the comments you would think to get while we're watching this, I would not think it would be like, by the way, I've been in his tomb. It's smelly. Like,
I mean, it's a dead guy. What do you expect?
But the quilts are
One of the things,
beautiful.
yeah. One of the things that I learned recently, because the New England Quilt Museum has a great display of presidential quilts and fabrics from presidential campaigns, is this wasn't novel. It's been done since the 1840s, which is pretty cool. But also, so the turnip that's in both the picture with the coat and the What I Know About picture, Horace Greeley was a vegetarian. And so the turnip was almost picking on him about being a vegetarian. So it's very interesting to try to figure out, was this supposed to be a supportive fabric for him? Or was it supposed to be like a tongue-in-cheek fabric to pick at him a little bit
Well,
because of the
there is
vegetarianism?
a long time with quilts and quilt nerding and quilt nerds. There is a long time association with turnips, so we're gonna say it's a positive.
Okay. I will totally. I mean, I think it's great. I also love his little waistcoat, his little greatcoat. I think it's really cool. So,
yep.
and we already know Jill calls him her boyfriend. So.
Oh, so Kathy just said he is buried in Greenwood Cemetery. It was open when we were visiting my great grandfather's grave. A relative was being entombed and they invited me in.
Well, hey, what a party.
If you're going to be
Yeah,
invited
right?
into Horace Greeley's tomb, you always accept. I second
Right?
that.
Yeah, you always say yes to just be like, I've been there. It's pretty cool. Thanks for sharing. That's a great story.
Yeah, that's the great thing about doing watch parties like this is people get to add their stuff.
Yeah.
All right, on we go.
Another part of the same quilt that is fascinating is this tealy turquoisey green that you can see in the third picture. And that is a centennial fabric. It was that green, that centennial green was only made around 1876. So that actually tells us when this quilt was made. In addition to all of the other fabrics around it, we know that it had to have been made after 1876. So this woman had all of these fabrics, or this maker. We don't even know that it was a woman per se. It's likely. But this maker had all of these little tiny scraps and was able to turn that into this amazing piece. The other amazing thing about it is that she tied it at every point. So every half inch or inch, there's a tie at every corner. So she had a lot of time on her hands and had a lot of scraps. But it's just one of those really fascinating stories that you just get dug into if you just take a closer look at some of the textiles. Quilting designs are another one that's near and dear to my heart. I'm a hand quilter and I love quilting, so I love seeing the different quilting designs or motifs. And you can really see a lot. You can definitely tell age based on the amount of quilting on the detail within it. You can see all these different things. Like in the left one, you can see the tulip and then the little 4-point quatrefoils. You can see a crosshatch. You can see some feathering, and then even on the right piece, which is a different piece, you can see some of the feather circle up in the one corner. But then you also see that it's almost like a fiddlehead fern. And it's just this really long, swirly line and this spiral. And it's just so intricate and ornate and beautiful. Where did she get the inspiration for that? What made her decide to put that in that spot? There's a whole other piece and story there about where did she get the idea? Where did she get that design from? Was it something that she had seen regularly or was it something that was passed down? Was it made in tin? You know, how do we find these things? How do we see the commonalities in them? And what are they trying to convey in the quilting designs as well? Sometimes even in certain quilting designs, even if they're doing something simple, they may do something more ornate. So this quilt is part of my collection as well. It's a very unique 9-patch done on point, so you have all this massive white space, but she did mostly crosshatch. So she was just going and making a grid, except for one spot on the left-hand side where she put her name and the date. So Mary, I haven't been able to figure out the name because the fabric is faded, or the thread has faded, but she dated it April 15th, 1846. So that gives us a time. And if we figure out her name, we could even potentially have a place and some history about the individual who made the quilt. And that's a really cool thing, because then you can really learn more about the time and place that that person lived. Maybe even figure out how she had all these fabrics, to see where she was class wise, or maybe it even turns out she was a milliner and she had all of this easily available to her. She was a shop owner, her husband was a merchant. There's so many different ways that could go, and that's the joy of looking deeper. And we see a lot of initials, we see dates in quilts a lot. That really does help to tell the story and kind of dig a little deeper into that rabbit hole.
If I could just
Even in
add real
modern day,
quickly,
we find
if you have any genealogy skills and you get a quilt that has names and dates, and it is like, it's like the birth of your first child when you find them on the census and you find out, like, oh, they were a tailor or a dressmaker, or you find out they lived near like some fabric mill or something, and it's just like, whoa. It is the coolest thing. It's like seriously like inventing or discovering something. It's so cool.
It really is. And we talk about that in a couple slides. So.
Oh, sorry. This
No,
is the problem
okay.
with not previewing. Like yeah. I promise I
It's
didn't
good.
read ahead.
I love the enthusiasm. So you're going to be even more enthused when you see all of the different signatures. So it's great.
Yeah. And the live reaction.
Right?
Okay. Moving on.
Yes.
fun little things in quilts, even with the advent of modern quilting. Now, I am a hand quilter, but one of the things I've started doing personally is during the pandemic, I picked up a cookie cutter that is a plague doctor, and I now put a plague doctor on all my quilts. So, 100 years from now, somebody could see this video and could have one of my quilts in their collection and be like, oh, I have the plague doctor in my collection. That's pretty cool. So I am contributing to the story through quilting design, and that makes me happy. Colors can indicate regions, they can indicate trends in fabrics. They can also give you a time frame on when the quilt was made. The three below are all Pennsylvania quilts, and we know that because of the common colors of those eras. There's a lot of books and information on how Pennsylvania Dutch specifically, or Pennsylvania German quilters used only a set routine of colors. They really like their pinks, their yellows, and their greens, as you can see, and blue. And then as an inside joke to a friend who has taught me a lot about German quilts, she tends to talk about a nice German, or a nice brown being German indicative in Pennsylvania, on the back of a quilt. So a nice brown back is what she says. She says it pretty commonly. So
Who could that
there's
be?
a nice brown back to that middle quilt. So again, just showing that it's kind of a Pennsylvania German thing, but also like
drop any
seeing the
Barb Garrett
change
names.
in pinks from like double pinks, as we call them, or cinnamon pinks, as some people call them, where they start off kind of light and get to a more reddish hue. So like the red on the right, or the double pink on the right, is more of that like big red gum kind of color. And that shows it's later in the century than the earlier, more softer pinks of the early to mid 19th century. Even moving from these kind of colors into more of our bubblegum colors post World War One, and we get into the beautiful pieces of 30s fabrics that we love, that are so bright and cheerful, and again bubblegum pinky and powdery blue. And that really does tell its own story. Where was this person getting these things? Where might they be indicated from? Um, and what are they enjoying about those colors and choices? So here's a great story about color and understanding the maker. These are both made by the same person, um, likely Mississippi. And we know that it's definitely going to be a Southern tone because of the triple bars on the outside, as we've talked about, and the fact that they're using this cheddar, they're using this oxblood color, and they're using this teal color. Three colors that were very, very popular in Southern quilting. So we do have that as a fact that we do know these are Southern. Um, we know that they're related because the same fabrics are used in both quilts. Had I not done some close-up research on these pieces, I might not have known that, but it still does attribute to me the relationship because they're both around the same time. They both have the same similar borders and they have the same fabrics being cut and used in both pieces. So that's really kind of a fun thing to get down into as well. Signature quilts or autograph quilts, as some people call them. These are great and they give you such wonderful rabbit holes and they're ubiquitous. I mean, we start seeing them in the 1840s. We see them pretty much nonstop in different form or fashion all the way through to the 50s and 60s even. And I think some of us have even done some in modern day. I know I have. Um, and you see the changes over time. You get to see all of these different names and get to research the areas. You might even be able to figure out who was the originator, what the purpose of the quilt was based off of the names and the time period and the location. Sometimes for later quilts, you might even be able to find a newspaper article where it was a fundraiser or something. But you're also telling the story of a family or telling the story of a community or just a whole bunch of girls that got together, or even a chain letter that could have come down the pike over time. And so these are really fun if you really want to find a story with him, because even if you can't find the full story of what happened, you find a community and you find connections and you find relationships. And it's so fascinating and fun.
So what's interesting there is um, before really talking with other people that knew some things about, you know, genealogy and stuff like that, I would see a quilt filled with signatures and it would be extremely endearing to me, but also overwhelming for not knowing what to do or how to start or things like that. And then through talking with people like Steph and Mia, um, being able to see that you could just pick at the tip of an iceberg if you wanted to, and just not necessarily dive into this massive quilt that has, you know, a million signatures on it, and just get a sense of where it is. But I find that as soon as you start digging at the top of the iceberg, you're not overwhelmed anymore. Now you're like wanting to peel back the layers of the onion and find out who's tied to who's married to who did this, and where did this go, and then they traveled over here, and then they this, and then that. So I would say, like, if you're overwhelmed with something like that, just just peek at something, and then you probably the overwhelming will go away.
Yeah,
In my
absolutely.
day life, we like to say, you know, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And it's the same on signature quilts. It's just you then realize that you have a really, really, really big taste for elephant and you just want to eat it all. So then you get a ton of signature quilts. So
Yeah. So I think one of the cool things about signature quilts that you kind of have already really alluded to when you, like Jill's saying, like you're hit with like you got 50 signatures, or some of those charity quilts that have like hundreds of signatures. Um, like what do you do? I mean, how do you even, you know, some of them are all names like Smith and Johnson. Like what do you do? And that, like, starting with the pattern and the textiles and all of these things that you've already talked about are like great clues to get you to like a geographical area, and then you can tackle the names. And my one thing is, like, I always found the weirdest name on the quilt because that's usually the easier one to find.
right? Yeah. Yeah. The one with like like there's some name on one of my quilts. It's like Zelda or Zima. I think I have one that says like Zima or something. And I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
that's the name I'm gonna track because that'll be the easiest one. There won't be a million
Mm-hmm.
Zimas.
Yeah,
So it's
I
really,
have
really fun.
the Quiggles of southeast Pennsylvania to research. I mean, how many people have a last name that starts with a Q? So
Quiggles. I love it.
the
I love
Quiggles.
it.
Before we move on, this quilt that we're looking at right now, is that a new? Did you get that pretty recently?
This is my newest acquisition, yeah.
Like
Yes,
how new?
this is
Like two
pretty
weeks
new.
ago.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I remember seeing the borders on that on the fall are just gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like did you get this from an AQSG dealer?
No, I got this from a New England. Oh, excuse me. I got this from the New England auction. Um, but
Oh, okay. That's why I've
but
seen it. I'm like,
yeah, one of my colleagues in AQSG has seen a quilt that was donated to the Maine State Museum with the same border. So
okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I was like, this looks really familiar to me, and I can't figure out why. But now I know.
Because Mia posted it and we looked at it
Well,
probably and
no,
went,
because yeah, I was gonna say because I saw it on the auction. Okay, no,
yeah,
I thought I saw a dealer that had it. Anywho,
yes,
moving on.
yes.
We also find news stories every day. This quilt that's actually behind me is the quilt that's here. It literally just came in right before recording this. It's probably about 1840, 1850. But just looking at it in the pictures here, and I do apologize for the mess, it's just I have a cluttered sewing room. Um, the fabrics are telling me that they're early because we have all of this beautiful print work design. You've got this simple painting on the green fabric, and then you have the picotage, the dotting on the brown fabric, which is super cool. You also have that beautiful stripe of blue and red together, which is an earlier print. But then if you look at the bigger piece, you see this huge border on the sides, and then you see the individual cutouts for where the bedpost would be. The size is odd and laid out, and that could be indicative of the location. It's also indicative of the fact that beds weren't standardized at the time, so this was fitting whatever bed. But as I get deeper into the fabrics, I will photograph every single piece of fabric in this quilt. I will measure it. I will look deeper into it. I'll look at the quilting designs. I'll look at the different fabrics and be able to tell a story within it, whether it's the time frame or the location, whether it's just a really cool cross piece of the fabric that was available to this person at the time, or I don't know yet, I could maybe find initials in it, or why why did they cut those off where they did, and is the cut at the same place, or did they intentionally cut it before the quilt was finished and the half pieces are the same on both sides. I don't know yet. I haven't had a chance to dig in, but that's what's exciting about quilts for me, is getting
So
that picture, seeing
we
all
could
of these different
pause for just a second. Um, so I was looking at this quilt because it's still hanging up because I haven't gotten to photograph it yet. And if you notice, the center is all reds, like red and yellow or red and green, and then it's like blue and tan on either side of the center
yeah,
reds,
I've also
and then it
noticed
goes out and
those stripes.
it actually
There's a
yeah
center
it
line where
actually
those
matches on
stripes.
either side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't notice that until I looked at it a couple days ago when I was sitting watching, just looking at it from afar. So again, once you hang a quilt up and you leave it for a minute, you might find another interesting piece or
Mm-hmm.
interesting fact within it. So I didn't even find that until I took a step back. I was just looking at it from afar. So
That happens to me
it's a
all the
really fun
time.
piece. I love it. It gets me so excited when I'm like, oh, she actually thought this through. This is brilliant.
Yeah, this is highly planned, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's
Yeah,
very
she
clear.
really planned it out.
Yeah, I noticed that right away with the stripes in the like the solid fabric blocks, the optics of that when you stand back, and that is, I mean, that's what's so fun about studying quilts. I mean, I know I've been to quilt studies where people have had quilts for years, and laying it out on the table and flipping it over and looking at the back, and people are like, oh my gosh, look at this, and the owner of the quilt will go, what? I never noticed
Yep.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's I took an 1830s quilt to seminar last year, and Sarah Scamarello came up, and she just recently did that whole study on lapis. And she's like, there's a lapis, there's a lapis. And I didn't even notice that there was lapis in this quilt. So she was like getting down in it. I was like, this is amazing. And that's so fun because now there's another
Mm-hmm.
cool thing to think about with that quilt.
Mm-hmm.
So fun.
It's funny how often, you see all these stories about the creation of quilts being very collaborative. And now here we are where the study of quilts are also very collaborative.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Absolutely.
It makes me
Yep.
so happy. Okay.
Fabrics and all of the things available to this quilter, and then how she put it together and made this beautiful piece that becomes part of the story. One of the things that we at AQSG and me as a quilt historian are really impassioned about is keeping your own stories alive. I talk about that first quilt that Aunt Becky made. That's the only one that I know of that's actually labeled with Aunt Becky's name on it. And that's because I put a label on it when I went to Houston last year. Most of hers are unlabeled, and it's going to be very hard as the years wear on um, to find her quilts if they end up in the wild. How can I identify them as specifically hers? How can I tell her story? And so we are very passionate about reminding people to label their quilts. So you can see a label that I made or had made for one of my quilts for the actual AQSG biennial study last year, which is another way we tell stories in quilts here with the American Quilt Study Group. But you want to put things like your quilt name or the pattern that was used, when it was made, who made it, and we know that you may be the piecer and you may pay to have somebody do a long arming thing. You want to put both names on it or just your own, that's fine. Where it was made, if there was a purpose, if it was for like a grandkid or for uh, a wedding or just because you felt like it, and any other defining feature. So again, on this one, it was the title, what I did with it, what it was for. Um, what I love about it is I've created my own story in there. I didn't realize that I had written biannual instead of biennial. So people are then going to be like, oh, was it every 6 months or was it every other year? And that's going to be kind of funny to me, even though somebody will get it in years from now and be like, well, what do you mean by that? But it's my own little unique story as part of the thing. And then you see my plague doctor, who again goes into all my quilts. Another way that you can document your own history or the history of the quilts around you is by registering them on the Quilt Index. The quiltindex.org is really wonderful. It allows those of us who like falling into stories or writing stories about quilts or researching the quilts that we have to have more research access. We can see the stories of your quilts here on this site. Others can search for them. And we keep a long standing history of quilts for as long as we have documentation on them. It's really a great resource. And I recommend if you have your own quilts or you have an heirloom that you know a lot about to put it there because the quilt may go away someday, you may go away someday, but the index will keep it alive. Some of the resources that we recommend if you like getting lost in stories, which I hope you will at the end of this presentation, the American Quilt Study Group, who you're listening to today. We're awesome. Come join us. We love researching quilts. If you love researching quilts too, come play with us. Again, the Quilt Index has a whole lot of other stuff, not just quilts, but stories, articles, ephemera, even some of the writings of the American Quilt Study Group. Going to museums. So many museums and historical societies and historical sites have quilts, and they love to get them out and talk about them with you. So definitely go support them and dig further into stories there. And if you're researching a family, if you're researching a name on a quilt or a whole host of names, Ancestry.com, RootsWeb, all of those places are available to you to get that information. Now, I've also included a bibliography and thank you page for the end of this presentation that'll come up here in a moment, just to give you some places to start on fabric dating, reading stories about different quilts in the regions, and other really fun things to help you really get lost in stories. And I hope that I hear your story soon and that you continue to share ours. Have a great day.
Yay!
All right, I want to pause here because I want everyone to be able to look at this bibliography in case there's something here that I haven't read Lest I Shall Be Forgotten yet, but someone keeps hounding me that I need to read that book.
I don't know if any Barb Garrett would be harping you to do that, but
Yeah, Lest I Shall Be Forgotten is a really wonderful book, so I highly recommend it.
yeah, I do
yeah.
too.
I also have started reading The Fabric of Civilization. I just have not finished that yet.
That one I read very quickly. I really enjoyed The Fabric of Civilization. It was very engaging, and so I really liked it. It was frankly, I liked it better than the book that's just called Fabric by, I think, Victoria Finlay. So yeah.
Were there any other, like, I was wondering on your resource page, if you felt like maybe like newspapers.com would also be another good place considering the ephemera that you had touched on.
Yeah, newspapers.com is another great resource. Fold 4, which is the military one. Really, all of them kind of stack on top of each other for that research part. This was just the beginning of my collection of books that I've read or that I have as reference points is so huge. This was just the ones that I thought were really poignant for this specific presentation. And there's so many more that are missing, like textile designs and printed cottons and so many others. The Brockman Encyclopedia or Blockbase. What's the one? Soft covers for hard times. All kinds of. I mean, even the Dunton book is back here somewhere on one of these shelves. So there's so many different. I mean, I could have written an 8-page bibliography, but this was just a highlights list to get people started.
And if you're,
this is a pretty all-encompassing list too.
Yeah, I think this is a wonderful list. I think if you are an overachiever, if you search AQS's appraisal training, they have a bibliography, a suggested reading, and it is like 20 pages long. It's every quilting book ever published, I think, of quilt history. So that one serves as like, if you are ready to fill your library shelves, that also serves as a great resource, but it can be overwhelming if you're just getting started. So
100%.
Let me just make sure that we go through your thank yous and things like that.
Yeah. We also have a question. So.
Oh, great.
Oh, I'm Becky.
Of course.
The American Quilt Study Group, AQSG, connects quilt enthusiasts through research and community. We study, collect, and enjoy textiles ranging from the earliest quilt fragments to studio art and modern quilts as we discover the histories, the stories, and the meanings of these quilts across time. We meet in person and virtually throughout the year, offering our members multiple ways to connect with others sharing similar interests. Our network is unparalleled. We're always excited to welcome new quilt enthusiasts to our group. Please visit AmericanQuiltStudyGroup.org to learn more. We hope to see you soon. Thanks for watching.
Yay!
That was so great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, let me.
Do you want me to stop sharing my screen, or should I just continue sharing because we've kept the volume good?
I think you can go ahead and finish sharing, stop sharing. I think we'll be okay, and then I can get our pictures all bigified.
Everybody, she told me to stop sharing.
I think we're okay. I think we're good. Okay. That was really awesome, yeah.
It was very good.
I have questions, but before my questions, Making and Musings, who happens to be our friend Jen Kazor, sorry to call you out, Jen, but she says, do you have any good resources talking about the quilting specifically rather than just the piecing?
So there's an organization within AQSG called Friends of the Needle. And they've been putting together a whole bunch of really good resources around quilting motifs and things like that. Robin Nelson, Nestlings by Robin, did a really great presentation at seminar last year. Excuse me one second. Trying to make sure I don't sound so congested. That she was talking about how the closer the quilting, the older the quilt, and that is pretty accurate for hand quilting pieces. Um, and then, as you get further on in history, you see the quilting widen out to like the 40s and 50s. You're just kind of doing, your stitch in the ditch or your shadow stitching around the quarter inch seams of the thing, because you're just trying to get it done to use it. Quilts in earlier history, the ones that we're finding that are in beautiful shape are the ones that were display pieces. So they were laid on top of whatever bedding you were using, and to show your skill as a seamstress or as a quilter, not particularly as something to sleep, excuse me, under at night. So there's a lot of different resources about that, but it's kind of nuggets of information within little books here and there. I think eventually there'll be something through Friends of the Needle and AQSG about that, but I believe there's also some papers in the research papers of AQSG that talk about the quilting as well.
Awesome.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a great opportunity to like publish a book.
It really does.
Yeah, and that is interesting because I think about all of the books I have. I have a lot of the state documentation books, and you're right. It's like applique quilts, pieced quilts, quilts from the 1880s, crazy quilts. But sometimes the quilting itself is a little bit secondary. It's hard to photograph, and I think that sometimes that plays in. So yeah. And honestly, personally, I'm like the quilting part, even though I do a lot of hand quilting, the quilting part is always less interesting to me than applique and piecing and stuff.
And see, for me, the quilting is much more fascinating because I love seeing the different motifs that people were able to conceive and design and put together even back in the 1840s, like the tulips and the hearts and the quatrefoils and all of that beautiful piece with the with like the fiddlehead fern.
And the
I
feathers,
bought
yeah.
that piece and I keep that piece because of the quilting in it. So for me, it's just exceptional.
Well, and now that I know that all of your quilts hide that pandemic.
Oh, my little plague doctor.
Yeah, the plague guy. Like that. I actually, when you first showed that picture, I was like, "You have a quilt in your collection with a plague dude?"
Yeah,
like,
I saw that. I was like, "What are we looking at here?" I love that. I'm gonna have to get a cake cookie cutter so I can start or make my own.
I did not. So somebody in Celebrate Hand Quilting said that they used cookie cutters to create their little quilting designs, and I was like, "That's freaking brilliant!" And during the pandemic, somebody was selling a plague doctor cookie cutter, and I was like, "Yes, thank you." And that's what happened. And then my dogs ate it, and I had to buy another one. So yeah,
the stories, right? The stories,
right? Yeah, the story within. And then the dogs took it off the quilt frame and decided to make it a chew toy when I wasn't home, and then I had to go buy another one. It's just it's definitely, everybody has their little things, and I wanted that to be mine.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. I think that is so cool. So one thing I jotted down sort of from the beginning where you showed your parents and then the quilt that your Aunt Becky made. And I mean, and you mentioned it as you went about labeling quilts, but like, I feel like your Aunt Becky's story, your story are very, very intertwined because she taught you how to quilt. And, I mean, I guess my question, I don't know if I really have like words around this, but like, I mean, how do you document that? I mean, how do you communicate that to future generations? It's not just labeling the quilt, but there's a lot there.
I think we're at a time in history where we have a really great opportunity to do that kind of documentation. The generations before us might have kept diaries, but the diaries always keep like the things that we don't need them to keep, or they don't keep the mundane stuff like, oh, I wore the purple dress today. No, I want to know what that purple dress looked like. And so with digital media being the way it is and the ubiquity of access to it, I think we have an opportunity to really document these stories and these histories in a more effective manner. So, Aunt Becky is 84. She started teaching me to quilt when I was 32, and I'm 44 now. And so I wanted to keep that story alive. So I took a road trip with her to the Schwenkfelder Museum for quilt turning, and I just turned on an audio recorder, and I just started asking questions. None of the questions really focused specifically on the history of her quilting, but it was like, what's your favorite pattern? Where did you come from? What got you excited about it? All of these different pieces that I might have heard bits and bobs of, but to hear it from her voice and hear it from her heart really does impart with me that tradition. And the unfortunate reality is I'm a fifth generation quilter, and I only know one generation before me and what their quilting passion was. I have pieces of my great grandmother's quilting. I have stories of my great grandmother's quilting. I have one quilt from one of my great grandmothers. I don't know exactly which one, but it was the top was made by her and it was quilted by someone else. So it's really nice that I now have this recording of Aunt Becky telling her story, and then I can transcribe it and put it in the quilt index with the picture of. I now have two quilts, two double wedding rings that were made by her, and perhaps I'll have more in the future, but I can at least keep her story alive and keep my story alive.
I love that, and I remember you talking about you were going to do that. I remember that was last year.
Yeah.
And I remember you were doing that, and I remember thinking, we had always talked about doing that with my grandmother. And my grandmother was not a prolific quilter. She did make quilts, but, just in general, getting that oral history.
Yeah.
It's so important. And you're absolutely right. We have so many ways now that we can retain that stuff. We've got the Quilt Index. We've got the Quilt Alliance and their oral history project. We've got, you're in IT. You've got your own website. You can put that stuff on,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just so awesome. I have more questions, Jill. I didn't want to hog it.
No, I was just gonna mention that Kathy made a comment here on YouTube. She said, "I have my grandmother's diaries, and I've been trying to match up with the jewelry that she mentioned."
Oh, I love that. That is so great.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so it's my mom was a quilter, and she was also a prolific journaler. There's probably 50 journals that I have of hers. And when you talk about mundane things, yes, it's a lot about really mundane things that aren't, but I'm wondering did she ever, I don't know if she ever wrote about her quilting. I've never gone and looked to see if she ever wrote about her quilting. Luckily, she did label a lot of things. She didn't necessarily make a lot of bed quilts. She made more smaller size kind of decorative quilts. But who knows? Maybe someday I should go through and look and see if she actually wrote about her quilts.
You never know. I think I need to be better. I'll pick up journaling when I feel angsty and emo, and I'm like, oh, I need to get all my thoughts on paper, and then I'll forget about it when I'm happy again. I'm like, no, I have to write about the good days too, because those are important for the future. You never know. Somebody will pick it up and be like, oh, this person was actually interesting,
and not a whiner. Yeah.
Right? Oh, they sound so boring. Oh, but here's some good stuff. Okay, great.
Yeah. Kathy says yes, waxing the floors along with family gatherings. Yeah, you're like, I did not need to know that you waxed the kitchen floor today, but it was great to know that there was a family reunion that weekend, right?
Right.
Or that there was a quilt on the wall while you waxed the floors.
There you go.
Well, it's like when they say, yeah, looked at the quilt on the wall. Well, tell me about that quilt. Give me more information. It's always the information that you want. They don't document because it's not everyday thought for them. It's just what they do. It's just what they see. It's that, oh, I went to work today. Well, how did you get to work? What did you do? What's your role? All that kind of thing. And that we always miss because we just take it for granted. So.
Yep, for sure.
Well, Steph, by all means, fire away here.
Real quick, Sherlock is here, by the way. Hello, Sherlock.
Hi, Sherlock.
So she says, I feel like journaling isn't always for future readers. It's not always a complete record because you couldn't know what those who come later would want to know. That's why collecting your own data is important. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a very good point.
And by the way, Charlac, since I'm thinking about it, I did look at those brutalist buildings, and you were right. Some of them are interesting looking, but you still don't have me convinced. This is a callback to Monday. So that you showed 2 quilts that were from Mississippi that were made by the same maker, and I love learning. And I've heard this before about the triple. The border, about that sort of pointing to Southern quilts. And I always love that reinforcement of hearing that again, because then I'll remember it. But my question is, like, did you get those quilts together? Like, what is your story about acquiring those for your collection? Because it's so cool to have 2 by the same maker.
Yeah, so I got those from Brian Ruppert, who is one of my quilt dealers. It sounds a lot more mischievous than it is. We met in a Costco parking lot to exchange quilts.
Isn't that the way it happens?
Yeah. I was in Maryland at the time. I was taking care of my parents. My dad had cancer, so I was back in Maryland for a month. And Brian lives just on the other side of Frederick County from my parents. So he had these quilts for sale, and it was these 2, and there was a Lemoyne Star top from about 1830. And that's the one I really wanted. But then I saw these, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And he's like, yeah, I picked them up at auction. They said they were from a house in Mississippi. And then studying more about Southern quilts, it was, learning about the 3 colors, the cheddar, the oxblend, and the teal being so incredibly common. And then the 3 sashes on the outside, and then the sash and the chip, and just the way that it's set, it was very, very similar. And I was like, okay, well, we could attribute it to that. Then we could say it's likely this, because you never speak in absolutes in history unless you have it written down. That's why primary
and even then,
source
don't necessarily believe
is
them.
Right? Yeah. It has to be like from the person who made it themselves, not their grandkid. It's the primary source of, literally, there's a picture with this person in a time, or going back into a time machine or whatever, if you have that. But the prints in the different quilts are matching too. So we know that they were made around the same time by the same maker. So.
And they're beautiful quilts. I mean,
they are
clearly very skilled needle person.
Yeah, she was a very, very skilled needle worker. I mean, I love the circle, because it's just these little tiny, like 1.5 inch by 1 inch rectangles put into the circle, and then she inset the center circle. So I actually traced that. So Aunt Becky really loves scrappy quilts with a lot of little pieces like that. So I actually traced it for her and gave her the pieces, and she's now piecing her own version of that. She did not. She did the center in 4 quarters instead of doing a full inset circle, but she is working on her own version of it, and I was like, yay.
Aw,
I paid it forward.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see them side by side.
I know, right? I can't either. So I've seen pictures of the blocks, and I don't think it's made it to the frame yet. I gotta call her this week, so I'll find out.
Yeah, I want to see that.
Yeah. So one more question.
Sure.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but how's your signature quilt going?
Touche. It's going. So for those of you who are new to me, in my ephemera collection, I found a chain letter that was a Happy Day quilt chain. So you were supposed to make a block and send it to the 5 people that you got the mailing addresses for. And then you were supposed to put your name at the bottom of the list and put 5 more names and addresses, send them out, and send out the pattern. And then they were supposed to send it back to you. And it's a star block with a hexie, and then a hexie on the outside with your name and everything on it. Well, I was having surgery last year, so I wasn't going to be able to play at my sewing machine or quilt. I was just going to be able to sit in a chair a lot. And so I put out the call to my friends in AQSG, my friends in the quilting world, and said, hey, can you make blocks of this Happy Day quilt chain? Quilters of the 30s and 40s were a lot less picky about precise measurements. And printing out that that pattern is different on different printers and different things like that. So I've gotten some that are various sizes. So what I've had to do in some cases is actually cut them and resize them and put
Yeah.
them back
Add a
together.
little bit, take a little off.
Yeah. And I've been massaging that together. The other thing was I had planned to put like colored solids of, because you have to put hexes around the entire stars. And so I was going to do colored hexes, and I was going to do kind of a rainbow gradient. But when I put it up on a design wall earlier this year, it did not look good. It muted the colors, or it didn't highlight the blocks the way I wanted to. So what I need to do now is actually just cut out white hexes, and I'm just going to do white hexes in between the blocks.
Gotcha.
And let the blocks speak for themselves. So it's in progress. It sits next to my recliner, and I work on a couple of blocks a week. Hopefully this winter I'll be home enough to actually work on it.
That's
I was
awesome.
gonna say, because you're never home.
Yeah,
I've been traveling. I have traveled a lot this year for my job and for fun. So hopefully I've got one more trip. I have to cancel one next week, and then I have one trip to Chicago in December for work, and then I don't think I may have to travel in February to Boston, but other than that, I should be good until about March or April.
Yeah, I feel like 2024, like you bounced right back from surgery and like, got on a plane, and you have been nonstop.
Pretty much.
Between your day job and your quilt jobs.
Yeah. And it's been fun. I mean, I've gotten to have some really great adventures, and I'm going to have some great adventures next year. I'm talking to the Virginia Quilt Museum about some more opportunity next year. I talked to the New England Quilt Museum about some stuff, so that's going to be fun. I'm doing some presentations online next year, which will be super great. But work is helping me with my frequent flyer miles, but I'm also trying to tie quilting in with that as well. Like, I did a presentation for B-Sides Las Vegas on how quilting and living history made me a better cybersecurity professional. So I actually got to tie quilting into my day job.
Oh, that's awesome.
Too. Yeah.
I love that.
So that's available on YouTube if you go to the B-Sides Las Vegas page. But
we're going to have to find that then.
Yeah, for sure.
That was,
and by the way,
when I got my Sebastian Stan picture.
Oh.
So you get to watch me be a little fangirl. It's pretty funny.
I was going to mention, I popped the link to the material culture video in the chat a little while ago. It probably says restream because we're doing the dual streaming, but right. So yeah, definitely watch it over if you want to watch it straight through and not have us talking through it. We do that for copyright reasons. So Jill, I don't know, what other questions you have?
I was going to say, how often do you get to watch the presentation created by the creator?
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, like watching myself and then hearing my voice without the cold. I'm like, oh yeah, I do sound decent. Okay. It's always weird hearing your own voice.
So I don't want to take away from stories and quilts. I actually was going to mention this quilt behind me. Actually, I consciously put this quilt up today because it has a story.
Ooh.
But if I could tell that very quickly, and then I have to digress a bit because we have seen something, the three of us, that I think all three of us could nerd out about for ages. So really quickly, this quilt, and I can't remember if I have shown it on my stream before. It's not much to look at. It's a turn dash or monkey wrench, and the blocks themselves were made by my great-grandmother in 1948-ish, 1947, 1948, around the birth of my uncle, who was my grandmother's first child. And then my great-grandmother became ill, and she passed away in the early 50s. And so my grandmother had saved these blocks, and in the 80s, she and her sister put them together. Her sister was a prolific quilter. They put them together. It's hand quilted. It's not super dense quilting. It's definitely quilting of the 80s. Not stitch in the ditch, but the inner shapes, and then just some basic things. And
get it done and get it quilted.
Yes, exactly.
To match the 2 to 4 inches that the batting calls for.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, of course, I probably can't show it because it's not on the corner that is closest to me, but she embroidered the story. So it's got her name, my great-grandmother's name, my uncle's name. And the funny part is my uncle passed away a couple years ago, and my grandmother did too, but he was very ill, and I went and stayed with him for a while to help kind of take care of him. And he one day said, go in the closet and get this quilt out. And I was like, okay. And he knew that I love quilts, and I thought it was just a, spread it onto the bed, show me. And he's like, do you want it? And I was like, heck yeah, I want it. And he goes, all right, it's the ugliest damn quilt I've ever seen in my life, and you can have it. So I was like,
I mean, yeah,
it's not ugly, it's beautiful. But yeah, I was pretty honored that he was ready to give it to me. Thank you, Karen. Yes, I think it's beautiful. And he also told me I was like, zip your lips, do not tell anybody else in the family, because they'll come for it. So
yeah.
Well,
Well,
but I put it out there. I put it out there. It's mine. Nobody can take it from me.
finders keepers. That's similar to the Sunday school quilt, the youth group quilt that I put in the beginning of the presentation. Mom pulled that out of a cedar chest, and she was like, it was my mom's, and they gave it to her for the stroke or whatever. And she's like, yeah, it's not that big a deal. And then then everybody who found out that I had it was like, you need to bring it down to church. So I had to like bring it with me
to show it
back
off
from Minnesota to Maryland to show it off in church one Sunday.
How
And I was
often
like,
are you traveling with at least 1 to 2 quilts in your suitcase?
this year a lot more than I had. So okay, so I took a quilt to Vegas for the presentation, and then that quilt went down to Vegas and then down to Virginia in the back. I took a quilt to Pennsylvania last month to Fawsington, because it had signatures on it that were families that are in historic Fawsington. So that's a cool little story that we're working on. So Fawsington has a different signature quilt made around the same time. Mine's northern Bucks County. There's a southern Bucks County, but none of the names overlap, which is interesting. And there was also a schism in the Quakers of that region at that time. So we're wondering if maybe it's the two different schisms that made the two different quilts. It may not be, but we're going to follow that rabbit hole. My friend Kim is the executive director there, so we're going to do some homework.
Oh, I love that. I know the Stevens, they have done some of that research too. Like some of the quilts they have got those like community sort of situations going on.
Oh yeah, Charlene, I have to blame or accuse Charlene and Bill Stevens of my addiction to signature quilts. It's kind of their fault, and how their rabbit holes really influenced my rabbit holes. Mm-hmm. So it's all their fault. Totally. Yeah.
Well, in our last little bit here, we've got about 20 minutes or so, and I want to be respectful of your time, because I certainly appreciate you popping in here, probably hiding from your boss.
I actually took the afternoon, so you're good.
Can we talk about visual storage?
And the visual same weekend, storage is the bomb.
In the same weekend, Jill and I were with our friend Anne. I think you kind of blew into town. I'm not sure if you were with anybody, but we all ended up at different times going to the Chester County History Center, which is in Westchester, right outside of Philadelphia. And we went to see a particular quilt show, which was signature quilts. They were lovely quilts. They were wonderful to look at. And, it was certainly worth the trip to see that quilt show. And then we saw the visible storage signs, and we were like, what is this? And it was the three of us in this lower level of this little museum, and we're like probably the only ones in there because it's like close-ish to closing time, and it's the middle of the week. And the three of us are like pulling these drawers up and going, and I've now talked to multiple people.
So loud.
Yes, I've talked to multiple people now who had the exact same experience, including the Stevens. They were like, oh my God, we were just gasping looking at this stuff. I recently was at the DAR museum. They also have visible storage. I mean, I certainly like all of my efforts. I want, funds and efforts and things to go into quilt study, but I would be more than willing to raise money for any museum who has awesome textiles that wants visible storage, because holy Moses, it's the best thing ever.
So I learned about visible storage when I was doing living history before I was a quilter. So I used to take a bunch of reenactors down to Williamsburg every year, and we would just go hang out in our fancy clothes because we were always in battle dress or doing battle related things. So we're all wearing our dirty stuff, but we, you like to get dressed up and be fancy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, I had a fancy riding habit. I like to show it off. So I would go down normally about this time every year. We would rent the timeshare and we would then go do some museum research and study. And one of my friends at the time, Mara Riley, was very into studying about quilted textiles, actually, because that was when Williamsburg had their quilted textiles exhibit, their petticoats and waistcoats and things on display. But she was also looking at the samplers. So you have to ask for the curator to come out and actually open them in Williamsburg. But in the exhibits are all this visible storage of things that they have on display that you can just open the drawers and look at. And it just opens your mind and opens the museum up to so much more possibility. And it's so amazing. And so being able to see parts of their collection that you just would probably not get to see otherwise.
Exactly.
So
because they only have so much room to display stuff, and they may have one object's on display, but they may have a dozen more of them that are in various states of condition and what they look like. If for anybody who's never seen visible storage before, essentially what it is, imagine giant filing cabinets with shallow drawers, and you pull these things out, and I mean they're state of the art. They're the kind of thing that I think museums, like a big chunk of change gets spent on these things because they're, I guess, temperature controlled and whatever. But you pull these things out and it's like, if you've ever seen the pictures of the Smithsonian where they have like all the butterflies or all the birds or whatever, but imagine it's needlework tools and, bits of sewing and samplers and garments and just, it's wonderful. It is the most wonderful thing. And it's fabulous.
It was great to see the pockets and all the flame stitch work and all the the pinballs and just so much of the additional little notions and pieces that come together. Even the little stamps, the signature stamps, I loved in Westchester because I know some people have them. Like our friend Sandra Starley has one. I think Charlene and Bill have one, and you're like, this is a real tangible thing that made this design, and it's so cool to be like, we're right there with it. It's really
absolutely.
great.
And that's another piece of the education is like, again, sometimes it's pen and ink drawing, sometimes it's a stamp, sometimes it's a stencil, and being able to wrap your head around what those objects look like. They're not as ubiquitous to find as the quilts themselves. They're out there. There's lots of people that collect them, but they're not something that you necessarily just. You kind of have to go to an antique dealer or a specialty kind of show. They're not the kind of thing you just see all the time. So it's pretty cool. People that aren't aware of that to be able to see those things in the context of what they're for is very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it also removes that issue that people have of like, well, if I donate this to a museum, it's just going to sit in storage and not see the light of day for 20 years and stuff. And the visible storage means that it can still be seen even if it's not currently curated into a show. And I wish all of them did that with all of their collections.
Well, I understand, especially like with quilts, because the earlier quilts are huge. We know that they are big pieces. They can't always do that. But it is really great that you can have that opportunity to go and see the stuff that's within that visible storage. Like even at the New England Quilt Museum, you all had some visible storage that was very, very fun. Seeing the Goldwater fabric in the presidential thing was really fascinating because it's the periodic symbol for gold and the periodic symbol for water imprinted in gold on this fabric. It was really kind of cool.
Yeah, the Goldwater stuff was always funny. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't even realize that it existed until then. Yeah, it was so fun. I loved it.
We saw, I think Westchester actually had a little presidential election display of like buttons and things.
They did like bandanas and stuff.
Yeah, and so they had some of the older stuff, the antique stuff on the walls, but in the display case, it was all like, things from the 20th century. And I remember Goldwater had some kind of button that was that same thing. I want to say it was like a glass of water and the gold, the chemicals.
Right, and the gold symbol, yeah.
What a clown.
Really cool. Right? It was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what else did I have to? I think I had another question that I didn't jot down because I was getting excited about.
I've
Yep.
got
Please
one.
ask any questions. I love this.
You know, now that you've watched this back, Mia, and it's been a while now since you like finished this up, is there
Yeah.
anything you can think of now that you would want to add?
Oh, that's a good question.
And they only gave you 20 minutes, right? Or
Yeah, we
25
only get like
minutes.
20, 25 minutes.
Mhm,
Yeah.
Yeah.
mhm.
I mean, there's so much that I could have talked about it with color and, the advent, the change in colors, how we, you know, Prussian blue and its advent, and then talking about different purples and then the different mordants, and then talking about lapis. Those are all individual rabbit holes that I could go down for days.
Mhm.
Um, I think I hit the points that I wanted to hit about stories really well. Um, Somebody did come back and ask me, um, what if, you are a well-known maker and you don't want people to know that it was your piece?
Mm.
Do you label it?
Hmm.
And I think that's a really interesting question, and it goes back to, that's it. Labeling is your choice, and I understand that not everybody wants to label their quilts, and that's fair. Um, but as a historian, I'm like, please label your
Well,
quilt so that we can
what's
at
a
least see
convincing
it.
reason to leave your quilt anonymous? Like, what's a convincing reason?
Well, if you're like, okay, so say you're a super famous quilter and you put something up for auction 20 years ago for, like, let's say Aunt Becky gets super famous after this video, right? And Aunt Becky's put several quilts up for auction at church auctions. She had labeled them, they say Aunt Becky on them. Somebody gets one and then puts it on eBay for 5 times the price.
Mm-hmm.
So they're actually turning a profit on that quilt because it has Aunt Becky's name on it. You know, I could see then where it could be a challenge. But his as a historian,
Mm-hmm.
I would still want that name somewhere on
Yeah.
there, some
Yeah.
kind of defining mark,
Mm-hmm.
so that 100 years from now, somebody's researching quilts of this era and they go, "Oh, that's an Aunt Becky. That's
Mm-hmm.
an Aunt Becky original. That needs to go in a museum."
Right. Yeah.
Or this is indicative of this thing, which led to this thing, which led to this person, or whatever. So I can see both sides of it, but I really, I still will always suggest strongly to label.
Oh, totally.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think what you're describing as far as the labeling, um, I mean, that's almost like a big A art issue. And
Yeah,
the fact that quilts are so often like problematic, within big A art, little A art, or craft or whatever, I feel
right.
like, you know what? I mean, the quilt maker needs to get the recognition and the money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. I feel like the labeling things is really more. I mean, it has such greater future importance.
Uh-huh.
Let's see. Sherlock
100%.
says, I feel awkward about labeling things that are gifts. I made this for you, not making it about yourself. Yeah, I get that, but I mean, also, I think just at the very least, name that you made this thing, and in terms of gifting, putting that person's name on it too. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's a nice thing. And Kathy
Yeah,
says,
I've seen a ton of quilts where they've been like, made for Billy by grandma, blah blah
mm-hmm,
blah. And that's still a thing. And
mm-hmm.
that's still labeling. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kathy says, quilt has been donated. Someone acquires it from the recipient and resells it. Yeah, I mean it's that resale thing, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, again, it's the big A art situation, but I'm kind of like, all right, if your name is your name alone is adding to the cachet of something to, for it to be,
Yeah.
sold at a higher price, hopefully you're making the money off of your other work. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly something I understand that area, because I am an artist, and I do hang my work in galleries and etc. And my gosh, if anyone would buy it, that would be great.
Buy Cake's art.
Buy Cake's art. You can resell it. Too funny.
I think personally, I want to label it to say I was here.
Yeah.
You know, I'm working on a book right now, and people are like, well, why are you writing a book? And I'm like, I just want to write the book because I want people to know I was here. Like, it could sell a ton. It could sell 3 copies, but it's still a book that marks me as being here at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I think our stories, I mean, it's a little bit existentialist, like, what is our purpose here, and have we done good things with our life, and all those kind of like big questions. It just is nice to know you made your mark on the world.
Yeah.
And we think historically, 100%. Particularly, I'm always going to go with the feminist route, and there's a lot of women's work has been disrespected, pushed to the side, made not important, and women's names have been lost just throughout history because of patriarchal societies.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just feel it's really important that we document these things for future generations. And the whole aspect of this material culture series is the fact that quilts can be documents. Quilts can be historical documents. Quilts can tell these stories. And if I don't have, as a woman, historically, if I don't have any other voice, at least I had this quilt document, this fabric document that said something about me and that moment in time that I existed.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I collect. I mean, there's just every quilt I put up and hang and start photographing, there's always a different question or a different story that I'm in. Like, why did the maker do this? Or this is an odd color, or could you imagine the dress she had of this fabric, or whatever. And there's always little nuances that make you just go, oh, they were human and they lived, and I'm honoring that person by keeping their story alive, by keeping this quilt on display, or sharing those pictures, or talking about the textiles within it, or even making light of it. I have a signature quilt that I think the names are starting to rub off. They've worn over time because I think they're on like a glazed chintz or something. And one of the names just says HANN. It was probably Hannah because it's a not a common name in the 1800s. But it just says Han, and so I call that my Han Solo quilt now. And Han Solo had started to sign his name, and then had to make the Kessel Run, so he had to go. But just fun little things like that bring life back into the quilt, even.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many quilt studies that I know I've gone to, and Jill can probably say the same. And you look at a quilt and you say, oh, it's beautiful, but there's this one block that's turned the wrong way, or there's just this one random block in the corner that like is a completely different color. Like, why'd they do that? And of course, everybody wants to guess, well, she was just trying to be unique, or she put it in wrong and was like, screw it, I want this quilt to be done, or she ran out of fabric and this was all the general store had. Like, we come up with all those stories, and there's probably a nugget of truth in a lot of that. And I guess you just have to be careful about not perpetuating like the folklore that is truly not real. I know we in our world we have a bit of trouble with that.
Yeah, we talked about that at the New England Quilt Museum. We got on our little soapboxes about mythos and folklore and things like that. But it's true. I mean, one of the reasons that I put up that first quilt in the presentation is because all the blocks are just like, it looks like they're supposed to be a form for that block, but then the person who made that block like made it 100 different ways, and none of them look the same. And you're just like, was this a class? Was somebody drunk at the time? What was going on here to make this top look this broken? But there's a story in that, and it's still really unique. As you look deeper into quilts, you see things like how nicely they matched up their points, or how nicely they matched up scraps to make a full block. And then as they get further along, it gets less done, or quilting is really great to one point and then it gets really cruddy. And so I've been joking about making a presentation called They Got Tired Too, because we've all been there.
Yeah.
We have all been there where we get to the end of a quilt, we're just like, we just want to get it done.
Yeah,
Mhm.
We
it's
just
good
want to
enough.
go on to something new. We're done. We're good. I'm over
Mhm.
this. Am I finished yet? I mean, I've been working on a quilt. So I started a quilt for the Octagon House in Wisconsin probably 3 years ago now. It's a community quilt, and all I want to do is finish it so I can put something else in the frame. And it's like I still have to have the same quality and care to it because it's going to be raffled. But it's also like, oh, I'm so done with stars.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean I guess I've only hand quilted 2 bud size quilts, and I did big stitch quilting. So, it was not like, your dense historical quilting. And that takes a while. I mean, and yeah, you do get tired of it in the end, and your fingers hurt, and you're like, I need 6 more people over this thing with me to make, many hands making short work. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that, but
But just the fact that hand quilting takes forever, and it does, and I agree.
Mhm.
But for me, I love the zen that I get.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Jill has recently been doing some hand sewing. I threw the line out and reeled her in.
Mhm.
She
But
stayed
I've
on the
done no
line.
hand quilting yet.
Yeah.
Stick with me, kid. You'll go places.
Yeah. I got you on the English paper piecing. Mia can get you on the hand
Mhm.
quilting.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
yes,
just takes time.
that's what we're going to be doing on Sunday, is doing a little hand sewing and some some stitch and bitch. I know we've invited you, Mia. I don't know, like, are you jetting off to someplace else?
I have a potential thing going on, but I might be able to stop in. I also have my Black Friday sew-in. So if you're on the Young and Millennial Quilters, if you're on Celebrate, I gotta ask if I can put it on Celebrate Hand Quilting, or if you follow us on Patches of Time, you'll see Black Friday. I always do an online Zoom where we can sew and stitch all day too. So
Mhm.
Yeah, and we're looking at doing something on the day after Black Friday. So the between all of us, we may have some, if you got to get away from Black Friday sales and football and all the
and
stuff.
parents and family, and just be
Yes.
like, I'm done with the turkey. Just give me some sewing time. Yeah, we're
Yep.
here for you.
We will be
Mhm.
sharing all of that. So that's exciting.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what else?
I mean, we started off rough, so I feel like we made up in time wise for starting off rough.
Yeah. This is super fun. I really appreciate y'all letting me come
Oh my
and
gosh,
talk
we
even with
appreciate
my
you.
congestion.
I mean, it's always
Oh,
exciting
so
when
fun.
somebody is willing to, like, come here and let us talk to them.
Oh, anytime. Yeah, just be like, hey, you want to come on for a while? Okay. Because I love talking about quilts. I love talking about the quilt history and all the stories and all my collection. So yeah, this is super fun. And I hope everybody else enjoyed the video. And
Yeah,
we're just learning.
absolutely. And so I don't know what the next topic. I believe the next topic, I have to edit the video, so I guess I'll know soon enough. Um, but Jill and I also have a topic coming up, but I think it's not until it's going to be 2025 when ours comes up. So
Mhm.
yeah, we will absolutely, show that one off. Like, come look at us.
I'll come back and I'll interview y'all. How
Yes,
about that?
yes,
Yeah.
that would be
There we go.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah,
talk
we'll
about all
definitely
the
do that.
behind the scenes blunders. And this is where Jill's lost her leg while we were filming.
This is the part where Stephanie forgot to turn on the sound.
Ivy says this was so great. Thank you. You're so welcome, Ivy.
Oh, thanks, Ivy. It's so good.
Yeah, but Druid says thank you, Mia. Yes, we love you, and we know that they would love you too. So, and thanks for bringing along some of your folks who joined on YouTube. So we're excited to
Yeah,
Oh,
meet some new people.
definitely.
Kathy said thank you. I subscribed and did a thumbs up. Thank you so much,
Yay!
Kathy. We appreciate you so much.
Thanks, Kathy.
Kathy's great. Kathy's from my guild back in Maryland, and she's so fun. Every time I go back, we get together and goof off. So thank you, Kathy.
Yay
Good to
for
see you.
Marylanders.
Yeah.
Well, we will let you get back to it, and I hope you feel better. And Jill,
Yes.
stop being sick, darn it. Both of you, stop being
I
sick.
know, right?
I'm literally gonna go have a nap and yeah, tell Lisa I will not make showmakers today.
Okay.
And yeah, thank you all so much. This has been super fun, and I'm sure we'll do it again.
Yeah.
Yes, let's please do it again. It was so
Absolutely.
fantastic.
We are holding you to
Awesome.
that. So we'll worm
Absolutely.
our way in between all of your other engagements and we're going to get you back.
Yep.
So.
Cool.
Well,
Awesome.
thanks guys. As always, we're going to end it there and we'll see you soon. So take care and have a great weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Are we clear?